Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. And I wanted just to do a couple of things to use a few examples on how rapid technological advancement is making it possible for people worldwide to solve problems that previously couldn't solve before. It's estimated these days that at least of last year that scientific and technical knowledge doubles every 12 months, which means that by the time you figure out what technologies are on the market, the next generation is already available. And that poses both challenges but also opportunities, especially for latecomers. I have a couple of examples to show, excuse me, to illustrate that. This is a little device. It's called Little Sun, made by a company in Europe. Actually, one of my former students is involved in marketing it in Africa. Solar cell, an LED light, and a battery. A decade ago, this would have cost about $120. It now costs roughly $5. It may appear simple, but for poor people who don't have light, has huge implications for education. Because it turns out that rural people, especially rural kids, do badly in school because they have no light to do their homework. It just comes down to the time they have for homework. The sun goes down before they are even able to get over the chores to get to homework. And by having this, the battery lasts about 6 hours. They gain at least an hour and a half or 2 hours a day of homework. And wherever this has been introduced, kids' performance is gone up by up to 40%. This is almost instant performance. This has only been possible because of rapid advances in improvement in the lighting and in the solar cell. And there are so many examples of this kind where seemingly trivial technological advances could have huge implications for improving human welfare. But they are also starting to generate a certain measure of optimism and interest among leaders around the world, starting to think about how to leverage technology for rapid economic development. For a long time, you couldn't get African presidents to think about agriculture. Every time you told them about agriculture, they thought it was about food aid. Until we started talking to them about the possibilities of using technological improvement to modernize African agriculture. So I published a book a few years ago, that's December 2010, took the book to a group of East African presidents, argued the case. Fortunately, they were willing to listen, I think partly because they hadn't read the book. They launched a book they hadn't actually read. The president of Tanzania took the leadership, took the ideas, went to the World Economic Forum, met with the 17 CEOs of agriculture-based companies, and got them to commit $3.5 billion of investment in African agriculture. And the only reason they were able to do that is because he argued the case for technological improvement. Argues that agriculture is about harnessing existing technologies and putting them to use. And so this message is starting to change how leaders think about innovation for development. It's no longer about scarcity. We always thought about scarcity of finances. It's really about abundance of knowledge. That we focus on abundance of knowledge, you end up with a more optimistic view of what is actually possible, as opposed to focusing on scarcity of resources. And so really it's about focusing on slightly different things, which is the rapid rate at which technologies accumulate. And as they accumulate, they give you possibilities to create new combinations and solve problems that could not have been solved in the past. A good example of that is classic example of the mobile phone. This was a dream for many kids or people around the world. They just dreamed they could have access to a mobile phone. And the reason we call it a mobile phone is not because you carry it around. It's because when a mobile phone was first developed by Ericsson company in Sweden in 1956, it weighed 42 kilos. You couldn't possibly carry this around or use it to update your Facebook status. But very quickly it started to be improved. This was being seen, this was a common scene in Chicago, New York, with chief executives being able to communicate with their headquarters. But very quickly, because of this notion of exponential technological growth, we started to see miniaturization of that technology. This was, it took 10 years for Marty Cooper at Motorola, having observed that trend, that the technology was becoming more efficient, it's getting smaller, and he reasoned that he could make this ubiquitous and put it in the hands of everybody. The company didn't believe him, so they gave him somewhere a corner, basically, to work on it. This was 1983 when they released Dynatac, that is the name of the phone. It weighed 4 kilos, cost about $5,000, took 10 hours to charge, and only 30 minutes to talk. And people joked about it, saying, called it a brick. The story of the mobile phone is no longer about communication. It's about the transformational impact of mobile phone in other sectors. We have the mobile money transfer industry, basically created a new banking system, which we couldn't have anticipated based on just these modest changes in the use of text messaging. That's the platform that made it possible to create a whole new industry out of what was a basic standard platform for communication. And the transformational impact of this has been enormous. We've seen for the first time technologies developed in poor countries being transferred to industrialized countries. Mobile money transfer was born in Kenya, is now become a global technology. So we see, because of this notion of technological abundance, ideas starting to move from poor countries to the industrialized countries, expanding possibilities for collaboration between business people worldwide. There are many examples of that. We're starting to see that in the area of medical technologies as well, with the expansion of both mobile technology, but also miniaturization of very well-established technologies that are becoming readily available. Same phenomenon as we've seen with mobile communication. A good example of that is ultrasound imaging technology. This is a $20,000 piece of equipment. A few engineers in Australia had some issues with how to take images of cows, because it's very hard to take a cow and send it, put it on a bed and scan it. So they said, why don't we leverage this existing technology and be able to move the device rather than moving the cow? That technology has already been approved for use for humans in the US by FDA, but also developed for the livestock industry in Australia. And that opened up new possibilities for basically thinking differently about how to deliver healthcare. We've seen this is a group of engineers at the University of Washington in St. Louis, developed a similar technology that you take the image and transmit the image through a mobile phone to a doctor. So effectively, patients can basically take their own images. And because it's so cheap, if the image isn't clear, the doctor sends you a text message and says, can you do it again? This particular device is already in commercial use. You can tell their electronic engineers are not medical doctors, because if they were, this is not a place to check for pregnancy. Certainly not. That's the CEO of General Electric unveiling a few years ago the V-Scan. Again, a handheld device that changes the economics of delivering healthcare, in that instead of taking patients to the devices, you can now take the devices to patients. We've seen similar advances with X-ray. This is a prototype released by a company in California last December. That's a tiny little device that takes images like that. And this is all possible because of advances in technological innovation and a few young people looking at the possibilities and then basically creating new combinations. A lot of it is leveraging existing technologies used in different fields. For example, the scanning technologies used in supermarkets is being used to develop a low-cost eye testing equipment here at MIT Media Lab. This is a $10,000 equipment. This is no more than $10. And you can imagine, speculate on the revolutionary possibilities of making this readily available to a large number of people worldwide. We've seen the same thing in the genomics with the sequencing of the human genome. When the human genome was sequenced in 2001, it cost $100 million. Today, it costs $1,000 to sequence a genome. It took 13 years then. It takes a couple of hours now to sequence a human genome. So sequencing of genomes is going to become standard practice by doctors whenever you go basically for examination. But the implications of this for drug discovery are enormous. It's not just in the medical field. We've seen already applications in a wide range of industries in energy, industrial biotechnology, food, agriculture, and forensics, based on a single platform, which is the sequencing of genomes. And because of this rapid drop in prices, you have just very large quantities of genomic information available worldwide. And what it's creating is new possibilities for countries to start partnering, because different regions of the world are interested in solving different problems. And by having a common platform, they can then start to collaborate. Being used now to find solutions to various agricultural diseases for the tropical countries. And there are at least 4 major areas of public policy that arise from these advances. The first is that to harness these technologies, you need essentially access to infrastructure, basic infrastructure, which is energy, transportation, irrigation, and telecommunications. For many countries, energy is the biggest bottleneck at the moment. And so investment in power supply makes it possible for countries to have access to these technologies. With the telecoms, we're already starting to see significant advances being made, particularly with the expansion of broadband technology. This is the world looked like this in July 15, 2009. This entire region of Eastern Africa had no access to broadband technology. That's how the world looks like now. That's how Africa looks today. All these investments with the fiber optic cables around Africa have been made in the last 4 to 5 years. This is about $4 billion invested in cables around the continent, another $7 billion in terrestrial cables just within Eastern and Southern Africa alone. The only reason this has been possible is because of technological abundance, the rapid rate at which improvements have been occurring in the area of fiber optic technologies. So we see already that's the cost. The cost of laying fiber optic cables today is less than 1/10 what it was a decade ago. This is all because of technological advances. The implications of this are significant. There are young people running small companies in the interior of Africa, working on animation for Hollywood. These are multi-million-dollar contracts for Hollywood, possibilities that didn't exist except until this became available. Now, what's interesting here from a public policy point of view is that the trigger for this was the World Cup in South Africa in 2010. Because FIFA World Cup said the Europeans must be able to watch the World Cup at the same quality as if it was being held in Europe. and that required high-speed internet. So FIFA World Cup has done for African telecommunications infrastructure than all the development banks put together. And this, if I was doing public policy, I would never think of soccer as the trigger for investment in new technologies. And as soon as this company, Seacom, this is the red cable here, which is a $160 million investment, of which about 76% is by African shareholders. As soon as this was installed, it basically opened up the window for everybody else to see that there were possibilities there. The second area that is really critical is to rethink the role of universities. Because if you take the view that this knowledge is abundantly available, the question is how do you absorb it and turn it into products and services? And that requires different kinds of universities. Universities that focus more on engineering and entrepreneurship, and more importantly, universities that are focused with doing something concrete, not just delivering certificates. And so there's a lot of reinvention going on in developing countries on what the next generation of universities will look like. We're starting to see ministries of telecoms creating their own universities because they are disenchanted with the classical universities that just train people and give them certificates to go look for jobs that don't exist. So we have examples of telecoms universities created in Egypt, Kenya, and Ghana. We have similar universities in Malaysia and other countries. And that's an area that really requires public policy research because of a better understanding of the relationships between ministries of education that own the space for certifying degrees and practical ministries like telecoms that want to solve practical problems. How do you create coherence between the operations? The third point, which is self-evident, is that you need to take this knowledge and translate it into goods and services. So the questions of how you stimulate entrepreneurship, how you finance young people, how you establish programs that enable young people to take these ideas and turn them into businesses. I can give you some examples of some of the work that we're doing in that area. And finally, leaders really play an important role. Without having leaders that understand the importance of technological advancement and are willing to take the risk to coordinate across different actors. If you don't have that kind of leadership, not very much will actually happen. And so this is where a place like the Kennedy School starts to play an important role because of the training that we give to our students who go out and basically work with the leaders or become leaders themselves. And they understand the importance of coordinating across different stakeholders and actors. So I think I'll stop here and take some questions. There are two mics at both ends of the room.
Good morning. My name is Claire Beckton. I'm from Canada. I just want to say thank you for the very interesting presentation. And your presentation was focused on the positive and technological advancements and what it's doing. But with many of these advances, there are also potential dark sides and downsides. What are the implications for public policy in terms of the challenges? And you've just gone through the whole area about security and privacy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I just finished writing a book called The Enemies of Innovation. This is a book about resistance to new technologies, in that because the pace is so rapid, you have disruption of established industries. And when established industries get disrupted, they hide behind, to try to maintain their monopoly, they hide behind arguments like privacy, intellectual property rights. So Napster was knocked off because of IP, but that was not the reason, because Napster was a disruptive technology. They hide behind, are the products safe or not? When you get to, say, genetically modified products, the arguments, are they safe for the environment? Are they safe for human health? But the fundamental argument or the driver for that opposition is because new technologies disrupt established industries. The risks are fundamental socioeconomic, but they end up being expressed not as a technological competition, but as safety, as ethics, as moral arguments or privacy questions. You take, for example, the whole area of smart grid has huge implications for saving energy. But the utilities don't like it for obvious reasons, because you are now starting to use less, you have the potential of using less energy. So the big question there from a public policy point of view is how to design innovation systems that are inclusive, so that the industries that are likely to be disruptive are part of the discussions right from the beginning. But if they are not engaged, they have sufficient resources to basically fight new technologies. And we're seeing major battlefields across the world, basically surrounding some of these emerging technologies, both in the industrialized countries, but also in developing countries. We had with the mobile phones, when the mobile phones first arrived in Africa, the claim was that they caused cancer. And the first introduction of mobile phones in Uganda, they actually added a screen to shield the ear from the phone. And up to now, older people in Uganda speak on mobile phones like that. And I actually saw a head of state of an African country last August speaking on the phone like that. And I wondered why. And that's how I found out that this is a residual from the days when there was fear that mobile phones actually caused cancer. So being able to think about inclusive strategies for developing these technologies becomes really important. Yes, please.
So even within technology, though, it seems like there is a distinction between, technologies that build capacity and technologies that might provide value but also create dependency, right? So for example, if I were Google and I said I'd be happy to provide free email to every government minister and every government employee in Africa, that's a very different kind of offer than another company that says, we will sell you on a commercial relationship a box that you run that has your email locally, right? And I wonder to what degree in economic development there's either a discussion or an awareness of the distinction between these two very different kinds of technology development approaches.
This is a question of lock-in, where you give it for free. And we use Gmail not because Google has asked us to do it, but because our friends already use Gmail. So it becomes a standard. It becomes a question of how you set the standards. And can you have diversified standards for different regions, so that there's flexibility in the emergence of technological system, because you can easily create dependency. This is China has responded to this by saying we'll have our own standard. But by doing that, they also locked up their market. So it's a trade-off between having a platform that is standards that are accessible, or basically fragmenting the markets. I think what is likely to happen, this is the story of the web, is a push for more open platforms, where you have a standard open platform, and upon that, people can build different technologies without owning the platform itself. And that's the story of the mobile phone, which is very different from the story of Google, for example. Because with the mobile phone, they built in redundancy, and it's that redundancy that got harnessed to create the mobile money industry. That's why nobody owns it, nobody controls it. And so that's, again, really a very interesting public policy question of how you design technology so that there is one way to think about it is think of a road. It's like a road. Like when you build a road, and if you start building, you build a road and you're asking everybody to pay for every 10 kilometers, you won't really harness the potential of that road. And so with the mobile phones platform, with the text messaging platform, that's more like an open road. And then people could use it to build new businesses. Whereas the Google system is a slightly different model, because they own it. And that brings in my view, the role of the public. The public sector has to play a role here to keep these systems open. It's the same debate that's going on over net neutrality. It's exactly the same issues. Yes, please. I can hear you.
Women's Leadership Board. I just wanted to, 2 points. In 1992 in South Africa, I got my cell phone. I still have that same number today. And up until, I would say, the last 10 years, and we always had GSM. We started out with GSM. Until 10 years ago, cell phone coverage was far superior in South Africa than it was in America. As a matter of fact, it was superior in many African countries over America. And if you wanted to really make an American mad, you'd say, we have much better cell phone coverage here. So it was they couldn't believe it. But my other point is around gender and technology. I work Pan-Africanly, and it doesn't matter what the technology is. If it's radio, if it's cell phones, if it's the internet, women still face a very severe gender bias from a cost perspective and from a literacy perspective. Do you see that there's any way from a policy point of view, that those issues can be better addressed at a macro level? Or what are your thoughts on that?
My views on that are actually quite clear. Last week I published a little article in a Uganda newspaper making the case for women's only technology-based universities. And there's actually one in Uganda called the African Rural University for Women, which is the first African women's university located in a rural area. It's Uganda's first women's university. And it's really interesting what they do when you give women a chance to make their own technological choices. The first thing they wanted was to build a radio station. So they communicate agricultural information using radio, again, an open platform. When it comes to agriculture, which is, I spend most of my time in that area, you ask women, African women particularly, on what would be their first choice, technological choice for agriculture. It's about something that controls weeds. Because African women spend about 200 hours a year weeding 1 hectare of land. And yet, if you look at the technologies being promoted in African agriculture, none of them is focusing on weeds, on controlling weeds. They are focusing on controlling pests because we had a pest control technology developed in the US and then migrated to other places. So it's being driven by technologies that already exist rather than answering questions about what people actually need. So this is an area that I'm particularly interested in that until you get women controlling not just the decision making, but being part of the discussion. And the only way, in my view, to get women in Africa to become part of the discussion is to equip them with the same technical expertise that we've been extending to men. And I don't see a way around higher technical training, to give equal opportunity for higher technical training for women. They will make completely different choices. They will develop very different technologies. Yes, please.
You might not have any further information, but it would be interesting to hear if you could tell us, do you know anything about your first example, the sunflower? From a public-private partnership perspective, what has been done to actually distribute that to rural communities, in disadvantaged communities, and what role government is playing, what role private sector is actually playing to sponsor this person? Given the fact that it's come down exponentially.
On this one, I think that leaders haven't woken up to the possibilities. This is being distributed, being sold, and subsidized in various East African countries. I picked this up in Tanzania and actually subjected it to a lot of pressure. I went and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with it, and it survived. So it's been pre-tested. But there are other entry points that are being used by various various companies. There's a company in Colorado called Nokero, N-O-K-E-R-O, simply means no kerosene. And what they're using is to basically use emergency interventions. When there's an emergency, like the hurricane in the Philippines, they supplied lots and lots of their units there. They have supplied lots of them in Haiti, for example, but through emergency programs. I have not seen anybody who has come up and said, let's build a large-scale program to make this as widely available as possible.
As you would imagine, it would actually, the ideal world makes sense for, say, Department of Education to look at that and say, wow, if we managed to roll that out in rural areas, we could drive up performance.
Oh yeah, it'd be huge. It'd be huge because we've seen it. It's introduced in a school, and even within schools, it's introduced in a class, and in that class, you see an improvement in performance because kids can do their homework. It's just the relationship is very direct. And if you take that off the table, if you take off the table the concern over homework, then you can start to deal with other issues as well. But that's so critical for poor families that want to get their kids to advance by doing better in school. So a program on getting this out on a large scale, you would have just a significant impact on society.
But we're not aware of the dedicated program that's links up the private sector and distributors with the Department of Education and so on in a particular country?
Not, I haven't come across any particular large-scale program to really make this available because the groups that are working on them, they are really trying to sell them. The way this company that makes this little sun work is because Italian tourists love to travel with this. So they spend a lot of money on buying this, and that's how they are subsidizing its sale. Yes.
I just wanted to add to that point. For the last 15 years, I've been involved in rural distributions. It is the most difficult thing to do for so many reasons. You have duty and VAT issues, you have transport issues, you have corruption, you have all kinds of issues, and this is exactly my sweet spot. My organization has just done a research project on lighting and education, and I concur with what you say. One of the other things that we found is that it enabled children to go to the toilet at night. And that was really, really an important issue. So, but distribution, nobody's cracked it. There has been no massive, large-scale lighting initiative. But there are several companies now that are making great inroads, particularly in Kenya and particularly in Tanzania, in my opinion, where mains electricity hasn't reached.
Yeah, one of the interesting origins of this was I was working with Nicholas Necropont at MIT on a one laptop per child. And one of my colleagues from Ethiopia started distributing these laptops in Ethiopia. And the kids loved to take the laptops home. And everybody thought this was a huge success because they can take the laptops home and they're doing their homework. It turned out that the reason they were taking the laptops home is because it was a source of light. It wasn't because of computing. And that's when people started to think about having something cheaper because that's a very expensive way of lighting a home. Yes, please.
I mean, just on this point, I mean, again, if it is like for business motive, I don't know how much the business is doing in promoting stuff like this, because in my country, Sierra Leone, where you have the Chinese penetrated using flashlight with batteries, you have in very remote areas, people using a lot of very old, weird out batteries, put them together, just get one light, put it like at the center so everybody can see. So it's not that there is no market out there, it's just that, I mean, the business people are not reaching out to where the market is, whatever that it is. And I think that $5 that people can afford it even in my country. And my second question is, what can you, or could you throw more light on technology and institutions? Because I'm saying that in so many workplaces right now, is sometimes you don't even need an office. You can just sit wherever you are. So there will be like disconnect that institutional face value meetings. What could you say about that?
I can throw some light on technology and institutions, literally. It's really transformational. I'll give you a little example. 2002, I went back, I'm original from Kenya, went back to see, they had just had an election. I went to see a colleague of mine who had been appointed as Minister for Economic Planning. And there was nobody outside in his lobby at lunchtime. And I thought, God, he's just been appointed. He's already so unpopular. There's nobody sitting here in the lobby, which was standard practice. You just find long queues of people waiting to see the minister. They are there to fix an appointment. The minister told me, actually, people don't come, they call me and they fix an appointment on the phone. The transactional costs of doing business significantly dropped with the introduction of mobile phones. Kenya's economy started to grow very rapidly around 2002. It was attributed to the new government, but many people believe that it's because of connectivity. With the mobile phones, lowered the cost of doing business, both public business but also private business. And that basically helped to drive efficiency in the economic system. But you can start to think with say this is why we were doing the one laptop per child, which is that the kids don't have to go to school to actually learn, because you have the possibility of having teachers communicate and work with the kids from their laptop wherever they actually are, in that the laptop becomes the classroom. But that requires a different way of thinking in terms of institutions. If we take the educational arena, the question I was being asked, I started my career as an elementary school teacher, and the question I was being asked when I was promoting these laptops was, how about classroom control? If the kids are using it but they are not in one place, how do you control them? And I said, actually, that's the whole thing, is that control undermines learning. By having this interaction among kids, they are more creative, they learn more. Every kid becomes a learner and a teacher at the same time. And it also changes the role of the teacher, becomes more like basically a mentor, as opposed to being a source of information, because the kids can actually get information. But that goes back to the question that was raised at the very beginning, which is the implications of these technologies, is that they change the way institutions are organized. You need different types of institutions. So it's not accidental that the mobile phones kicked in very quickly in Africa, where most of the institutions either didn't exist or were dysfunctional. And therefore you could start to create new ones. But without, you can't introduce new technologies using old institutions. You have to actually change both. You get a lot of resistance if you try to do that. So finding opportunities where you are not competing with the old structures in terms of institutional reform becomes really important. It's much easier to move a graveyard than to reform an old institution, because at least when you're moving a graveyard, you don't have opposition from the occupants. We have 5 minutes. I'm told that we have to finish at 9:30. Yes, please.
I have two comments, or one question, one comment. Just to the question asked earlier, I work with the Inter-American Development Bank, and one of the ways that we found we could market technology like this was actually through our diaspora community located in the United States. It's really a very successful marketing strategy. So you pay for it here, but the family receives it in Haiti in particular. But I was wondering if you could comment on some of the more interesting or promising developments you've seen in innovation in agriculture, because I'm just curious about your experiences.
In agriculture, I think the biggest challenge for agriculture today is climate change. In that almost all the crops that we grow, wherever we grow them, they were selected and bred on one assumption, which was that the ecological conditions were stable and predictable. And that's not the case anymore. So we need a new way of breeding crops that are more adaptable. And that gets you back to this question of abundance and redundancy in the availability of seed. We just had a couple of weeks ago a session in this room on creating a cacao and chocolate university in Ecuador. And it just happens that cocoa trees evolved in a tropical moist forest of the Americas under very stable conditions of humidity, and then got transferred to West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and then to Indonesia, again, areas where humidity was consistent and stable. This is being affected by climate change. Farmers are starting to notice it, and they are switching to other crops. And cocoa trees are really a problem because it takes a long time to breed a new variety. And that's now leading to more really significant interest in the application of genomics with the sequencing of the genomes of various crops. Mass cooperation and partnership with other industries have sequenced the cacao genome, but they are also sequencing, they have launched a program to sequence 100 African crops, traditional crops that are grown in various local areas but not consumed widely. And that would help to think about breeding new generation of crops that can be brought into the global food system. The area of genomics, I think, is going to have a much bigger impact on agriculture by opening up possibilities to adapt to climate change. And the other area is with the climate change, we have the real risk of new pests. And the first disruptions from these pests is not going to be just large-scale damage of crops, but disruption of international trade. In that whenever a country hears that there's a new disease that has hit food crops in one country, they just close their borders. A couple of weeks ago, the European Union basically banned the importation of mangoes from India because of a pest outbreak in India. We're going to see a lot more incidents of that kind, which means that being able to think and leverage some of these emerging technologies, not only to control pests, but to anticipate what kinds of diseases, what kinds of pests that might emerge in different locations, is going to be really important. The third area that I'm interested in is data collection, agricultural data collection, in that farmers grew, again, they knew that when it rained, they grew certain crops because they had a sense of how much moisture was in that soil. That's not predictable anymore. So we need new sensing technologies. We've been using satellites to do that. South Africa uses satellites to basically manage vineyards, and they can say, we are going to irrigate that place because it's drier than that place on the same farm because of variations just on one farm. So the whole area of precision agriculture with the use of satellites is starting to happen, but the next frontier is really going to be leveraging drone technologies, because you can use drones to do that sensing and mapping within a small localized area. One has to deal with the stigma of drones. You mentioned the word drone, people think about killing people, but it's just incredible capacity with these unmanned vehicles to support a new form of agriculture. And because it's easier to use, you can use it on a laptop. You don't have to be highly educated to actually operate it. And they're much cheaper. They're smaller and modular. You don't have to have the large investments. I think these are areas that are going to change the way we do agriculture. So this metaphor of mobile phones, I could see this happening in agriculture, in medical care, in environmental management, and many other fields as well. And it is already happening. It's just not happening on a large scale. So it's not that difficult to actually aggregate this and have a much bigger impact. Am I sounding a bit too optimistic? Good. I want to be. I can take a last question, I think, and then we can wind up. Otherwise, if there's now President, thank you so much for coming.